Susan Crawford brought 12 people to crash my family weekend at my isolated ranch cabin, demanding to inspect my private property with video cameras. So I killed every light on the property and changed the gate code, trapping the HOA president and her committee in complete darkness 3 miles from civilization with wild animals nearby. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The moment I stepped out of my truck at the old ranch cabin, I knew someone had been here. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, cigarette butts near my fire pit, and worst of all, someone had tried to force open my storage shed. The lock was scratched and bent like someone had taken a crowbar to it. I bought this isolated cabin and 20 acres of wilderness specifically to get away from people. After working construction in the city for 15 years, dealing with traffic, noise, and neighbors who complained about everything, I wanted peace. This place was 3 miles down a dirt road from the nearest house, surrounded by forest, with no cell service and no HOA telling me how to live. But apparently I was wrong about the HOA part. As I was examining the damaged lock, I heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines driving fast down my private road. I walked to the front of my cabin and watched in disbelief as 3 cars pulled up to my gate. Out of the lead car stepped a woman who looked like she'd never been outside city limits in her life. Perfectly styled blonde hair, white pants that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and sunglasses that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager." She was followed by 4 other people, 2 men in business suits and 2 women dressed like they were going to a country club. The blonde woman marched up to my gate and started shaking it aggressively. "Open this gate immediately," she shouted. "I'm Susan Crawford, president of Pine Valley Estates HOA, and we have business to discuss." I stared at her through the chain-link fence. "Ma'am, this is private property. You're 3 miles outside Pine Valley Estates. Whatever HOA you represent has no authority here." Susan's face turned red. "Don't you dare take that tone with me. This property backs up to our community, and your activities are affecting our property values." "What activities?" "The noise, the smoke, the unsightly appearance of this place." She gestured at my cabin like it was a toxic waste dump. "Our residents paid good money for a quality neighborhood, and we won't have it ruined by some hillbillies hunting shack." I felt my jaw clench. The cabin wasn't much to look at from the outside, weathered logs, a simple metal roof, basic construction. But it was mine, it was legal, and it wasn't hurting anyone. "Lady, you need to leave. This is private property and you're trespassing." "I am not trespassing," Susan shrieked. "This is a community issue. Robert, show him the papers." One of the suits stepped forward with a folder. "Sir, we represent the Pine Valley Estates Property Management Group. We've received multiple complaints about activities on this property, excessive noise, illegal burning, potential environmental violations." "From who?" "The nearest house is 3 miles away. Our community members have reported hearing gunshots, seeing smoke, and observing large gatherings that appear to be hunting parties." I almost laughed. "I target shoot on my own property, I have legal burn permits for brush clearing, and the large gatherings were my brother and 2 friends helping me fix my roof." Susan interrupted before the suit could respond. "We don't care about your excuses. This property is bringing down our home values, and we demand immediate action." "Such as?" "Remove those hideous outbuildings, stop all shooting activities, eliminate the fire pit, and clean up this eyesore so it doesn't offend our residents." I looked at this woman in complete amazement. "You want me to modify my private property, which isn't in your HOA, to please people who don't live here and have no legal right to complain?" "Yes, exactly. Finally, someone who understands how communities work." That's when I realized Susan Crawford was completely insane. Over the next hour, Susan and her committee proceeded to lecture me about community responsibility, property standards, and doing what's right for everyone. They took photos of my cabin, my outbuildings, my fire pit, and even my truck. They measured distances from my property line to my structures. They acted like they were conducting an official inspection. When I told them to leave, Susan informed me that they would be filing complaints with the county, the state environmental agency, and the Forest Service. She claimed my activities violated noise ordinances, fire safety regulations, and hunting restrictions. "We know people," she said smugly. "Important people. People who can make your life very difficult if you don't cooperate." After they finally left, I spent the evening researching Susan Crawford and Pine Valley Estates. What I found made my blood boil. Pine Valley Estates was a gated community of expensive homes built 3 years ago. The development had destroyed 50 acres of old-growth forest to make room for houses that started at $500,000. They had their own private security, manicured lawns that required massive amounts of water in our drought-prone area, and HOA fees that cost more than most people's rent. Susan Crawford wasn't just the HOA president, she was married to the developer who built Pine Valley Estates. She lived in a 5,000-square-foot mansion and drove a car that cost more than I made in 2 years. And now she wanted to control my property too. The harassment started immediately. County inspectors showed up to investigate complaints about my septic system, my well, my electrical wiring, and my fire permits. Every inspection found no violations, but each one cost me time off work and money for paperwork. Someone, and I had a pretty good idea who, filed a complaint claiming I was illegally hunting on my property. A game warden spent 3 hours explaining to Susan's witnesses that target shooting is legal on private property and doesn't require hunting licenses. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I had invited my brother Mark and his teenage son Tyler to spend the weekend at the cabin. We planned to do some fishing, work on fixing my dock, and enjoy some peace and quiet away from the city. Friday evening, we were sitting around the fire pit roasting hot dogs when we heard vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles moving fast. "Uncle Jack, who's that?" Tyler asked, pointing toward the road. I stood up and felt my stomach drop. 5 cars were heading toward my property, and leading the convoy was Susan Crawford's white Mercedes. "Mark, get Tyler inside the cabin." "What's going on?" "Remember that HOA psycho I told you about? She's back and she brought friends." The 5 cars pulled up to my gate and disgorged 12 people. Susan emerged from her Mercedes wearing what looked like a safari outfit, complete with khaki vest and hiking boots. She was followed by people I recognized from her previous visit, plus several new faces. But what made my blood pressure spike was seeing Tyler's classmate Amy among the group. The 17-year-old daughter of one of Susan's neighbors was holding a video camera and filming everything. Susan marched up to my gate and started demanding entry. "Open this gate, Jack. We're here for an official inspection." "Official inspection by who?" "The Pine Valley Estates Community Standards Committee. We have reports of underage drinking, illegal weapons, and environmental violations." I looked at the 12 people standing outside my gate. They were all dressed like they were going on an expensive camping trip, complete with matching outfits and professional cameras. "Susan, you have no authority here. Take your committee and leave." "We're not leaving until we document the violations on this property. Amy, make sure you're getting all of this on video." That's when I understood what was really happening. Susan hadn't brought an inspection committee, she'd brought an audience. She was planning to humiliate me in front of her wealthy friends and post the video online as some kind of trophy. "Mark," I called to my brother, "call the sheriff. Tell them we have trespassers refusing to leave private property. You can't call the police on us." Susan shouted. "We're conducting legitimate community business." "No, Susan. You're trespassing on private property with 12 people, including a minor, and threatening to enter my home without permission." One of the new faces, a man in his 60s wearing expensive outdoor gear, stepped forward. "Young man, I'm Harrison Webb, Pine Valley Estates Legal Counsel. We have legitimate concerns about activities on this property that affect our community." "Mr. Webb, are you licensed to practice law in this county?" "Well, no, but I am a retired attorney and I understand property law." "Then you understand that you're currently trespassing on private property and advising others to commit the same crime." Susan was getting more agitated by the minute. "Stop trying to intimidate us with legal threats. We know our rights." "Actually, Susan, you don't. But you're about to learn them." I walked back toward my cabin, leaving the 12 trespassers at my gate. Mark met me at the door. "Jack, what are you planning?" "Something that will teach Susan Crawford the difference between public property and private property." I went to my electrical panel and threw the main breaker. My entire property went dark, cabin, security lights, gate lights, everything. Then I walked to my gate control system and changed the entry code. "What are you doing?" Susan demanded as I worked on the keypad. "Security upgrade," I replied. "Amazing how much clearer you can think when you're not being harassed by trespassers. We demand to speak with you. Turn those lights back on." "Susan, you came to my property uninvited with 12 people, including a minor. You're trespassing, threatening to enter my home, and filming everything for what I can only assume is some kind of social media harassment campaign." I finished reprogramming the gate and stepped back. "Now here's what's going to happen. You and your committee are going to leave my property immediately. We're not going anywhere until we complete our inspection. Then you're going to have a long, dark night." Susan tried the gate code she'd apparently memorized from watching me earlier. Nothing happened. She tried it again, pressing the buttons harder. Still nothing. Jack, open this gate right now. I changed the code, Susan. Amazing what you can accomplish when you're not being harassed by HOA Karens. The reality of their situation was starting to dawn on Susan's committee. They were trapped outside my gate in complete darkness, 3 miles from the nearest road with no cell service. This is illegal detention. Harrison Webb shouted. No, Mr. Webb, this is trespassing consequences. You came onto my property without permission, and now you get to experience the full security features of rural living. Amy, Tyler's classmate, spoke up for the first time. Mr. Jack, can you please just let us leave? I didn't know this was going to happen. Amy, you can leave anytime. But first, I want to understand why you're here filming my family's private weekend. The teenager looked embarrassed. Mrs. Crawford said you were doing illegal stuff and that we should document it for the community. She said it would be fun, like a neighborhood watch thing. So she convinced you to trespass on private property and film a family gathering without permission? Susan interrupted angrily. Don't you dare talk to that child. Amy, don't answer his questions. Actually, Susan, Amy is 17 years old, which makes her a minor. You brought a minor onto private property to participate in what you called an official inspection of alleged illegal activities. That's child endangerment. Harrison Webb was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Susan, perhaps we should reconsider our approach here. We're not backing down. Jack, you open this gate immediately or we'll call the police. I held up my phone. No signal, Susan. Remember? That's why I chose this property. No cell towers, no internet, no way for HOA presidents to harass people with constant calls and emails. The group was starting to panic. They'd driven out here expecting to intimidate me with numbers and cameras. Instead, they were trapped in darkness on property they had no right to be on. How do we get out of here? One of Susan's committee members asked nervously. Well, I said thoughtfully, you could walk back to the main road. It's only 3 miles. Of course, it's pretty dark and we do have bears and coyotes in these woods. Bears? Amy shrieked. Oh yes. Had a mama bear with cubs go through my garbage last week. They're usually not aggressive unless they feel threatened. Of course, 12 people stumbling through the woods in the dark might seem threatening to a protective mother. Susan was furious. This is kidnapping. You can't hold us here against our will. Susan, I'm not holding you anywhere. You're free to leave anytime. Just walk back the way you came. In the dark? Without lights? Are you insane? I'm not the one who showed up at someone's private property with 12 uninvited guests and a video camera. Harrison Webb tried a different approach. Jack, surely we can resolve this reasonably. What do you want? I want Susan Crawford to stop harassing me about my legal use of my own property. I want her to stop filing false complaints with county agencies. And I want her to understand that Pine Valley Estates HOA has no authority over land that isn't in Pine Valley Estates. Fine. Whatever. I agree. Susan shouted. Now open the gate. Susan, you agreed to the same thing 2 weeks ago and then you filed 3 more false complaints. Why should I believe you now? Because we're trapped in the dark with wild animals. The bears aren't that wild. Mostly they just want to be left alone on their own territory. Kind of like me. I let that comparison sink in for a moment. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Each of you is going to apologize to my brother and nephew for disrupting their weekend. Then you're going to promise, in front of witnesses, to stop harassing me about my property. Finally, Amy is going to delete that video and promise never to film on my property again. This is extortion. Susan screamed. No, Susan, this is consequences. You spent months trying to use intimidation, false official authority, and social pressure to control my property. Now you get to experience what it feels like when someone else controls your situation. One by one, Susan's committee members stepped forward to apologize. Most of them seemed genuinely embarrassed about the situation and admitted they hadn't understood they were trespassing. Amy deleted the video and apologized tearfully to Tyler for betraying his trust. Harrison Webb apologized professionally and promised to advise Susan about the legal risks of continued harassment. That left Susan herself, standing in the darkness with her arms crossed, still refusing to back down. I will not apologize for protecting my community's property values. Then you can protect them from out here all night. I started walking back toward my cabin where Mark and Tyler were watching from the porch. Wait. Susan called out. Fine. I'm sorry for interrupting your weekend. I stopped and turned around. And I'll stop filing complaints about your property. Because. A long pause. Because your property isn't in Pine Valley Estates, and I have no authority here. That's right, Susan. You have no authority here. This is my land, my home, and my sanctuary from people exactly like you. I opened the gate and stepped aside as Susan's committee hurried to their cars. Most of them looked embarrassed and eager to leave. Susan herself stomped to her Mercedes without making eye contact. But before she got in her car, she turned back with one final threat. This isn't over, Jack. I have friends in high places. Important friends who can make your life very difficult. I smiled. Susan, you just spent 3 hours trapped in the dark because you couldn't understand the difference between your authority and my property rights. Your important friends can't change geography and they can't change the law. After they left, Mark and Tyler came down from the porch. Uncle Jack, that was incredible, Tyler said. I can't believe you trapped them all out here. Sometimes, Tyler, bullies only understand one language: consequences. Your Aunt Susan there spent months trying to bully me off my own property. Tonight she learned that some people fight back. But Susan Crawford wasn't done with me. The next Monday, I received a call from the county sheriff's office. Susan had filed charges against me for unlawful detention and child endangerment. She claimed I had held her committee against their will and put a minor in danger. Sheriff Morrison was an old friend who'd grown up in these parts. He listened to Susan's story, then asked to hear mine. Jim, I told him, they came onto my property without permission with 12 people and a video camera. When I asked them to leave, they refused. I secured my gate to prevent further trespassing. They were free to walk away at any time. And the child endangerment charge? She brought a 17-year-old onto private property to film what she claimed were illegal activities. If anyone endangered that kid, it was Susan. Sheriff Morrison sighed. Jack, I've dealt with Susan Crawford before. She's filed dozens of complaints against people who don't live in her HOA. Most of them are harassment. What happens now? I'll investigate, but between you and me, Susan doesn't have a case. You have every right to secure your property against trespassers. The fact that they got locked out by their own illegal behavior isn't your problem. The investigation took 2 weeks. During that time, 3 of Susan's committee members came forward to give statements supporting my version of events. They admitted they'd been misled about the purpose of their visit and acknowledged they were trespassing. Amy's parents were furious when they learned Susan had taken their daughter onto private property without permission and encouraged her to film strangers. They filed their own complaint against Susan for child endangerment. Harrison Webb, the retired attorney, contacted me directly to apologize. He admitted he'd been manipulated by Susan's claims about legal authority and offered to testify on my behalf if needed. Sheriff Morrison closed the investigation without filing charges. His report stated that Susan Crawford had repeatedly abused the complaint system to harass law-abiding citizens, and recommended that future complaints from her be carefully scrutinized for legitimacy. But the real victory came a month later. I was sitting on my porch enjoying a quiet Sunday morning when my phone rang. It was my neighbor Frank, who lived on the main road near the entrance to my property. Jack, you need to see this. Susan Crawford's house is for sale. I drove into town that afternoon and sure enough, there was a for sale sign in front of Susan's mansion in Pine Valley Estates. According to Frank, she'd put the house on the market immediately after the sheriff's investigation concluded. The local newspaper had picked up the story about Susan's pattern of harassment and abuse of official resources. The Pine Valley Estates HOA board had voted her out as president and banned her from filing complaints on behalf of the community. Several of her neighbors came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. Susan had been targeting anyone whose property she deemed substandard, even when those properties weren't in her HOA. The county announced they were reviewing all complaints filed by Susan Crawford over the past 3 years. Dozens of investigations were found to be based on false or exaggerated claims, costing taxpayers thousands of dollars. Susan Crawford, who had spent years using fake authority and social pressure to control other people's properties, finally faced consequences for her behavior. 6 months later, I heard she'd moved to another state, where presumably she was making some other HOA miserable. The new president of Pine Valley Estates HOA was a retired teacher named Robert Chin, who actually understood the difference between reasonable community standards and harassment. Under his leadership, the HOA focused on maintaining their own community instead of attacking outsiders. My cabin became a refuge for family and friends who needed to escape city life. Tyler brought his friends up for camping trips, Mark and I completed our dock project, and I finally got the peace and quiet I'd been seeking. The gate still works perfectly. The code is still changed regularly. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when I'm sitting by my fire pit watching the stars, I think about Susan Crawford and her committee of 12 trespassers. She thought she could use intimidation, fake authority, and social pressure to control my property and my life. Instead, she learned that when you corner someone on their own land, you might not like the consequences. The darkness that night wasn't just from killing the lights, it was the darkness of Susan's own actions coming back to haunt her. Some people spend their lives trying to control others through fear and intimidation. But eventually, they meet someone who refuses to be controlled. Susan Crawford wanted to teach me about community standards. She succeeded. She taught me that the most important community standard is respecting other people's rights and property. Everything else is just HOA nonsense.